This episode of Own the Grey is brought to you by I Am. Discover your unique talents, realize your potential, and align to your path. Take the first step to uncover your life purpose by visiting debrajones.ca/courses. Up until only 1974, banks in the U.S. required single, divorced, or widowed women to bring a man along to cosign any credit application. Money management was usually seen as a man's domain. Since then, women have been proving that they can be expert money managers. If you've always delegated the finances to your partner, consider taking control of your destiny. My next guest is a retirement advisor helping women plan for a comfortable future. He works with divorced or widowed women who find themselves in unchartered financial territory. Grab a coffee and learn some valuable tips on managing your finances, setting yourself up to live a fulfilling, comfortable life. Welcome to Own the Grey, a podcast to dispel the notion that aging is undesirable and setting new, positive attitudes. I'm Deborah Jones, and I believe you can be vibrant and healthy throughout the best years of your life. So today I have Russ Thornton, who is a fee-only financial advisor, and he works primarily with baby boomers, especially women that are now on their own as a result of divorce or widowhood. So welcome, Russ, to the show.
Thanks, Deborah. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here because this topic is a really hot topic. I find in my line of work when I'm dealing with emotional issues, when women are dealing with their emotional issues, one of the biggest fear factors in making a transition in life, whether it is chosen through divorce or forced upon you in widowhood, is the financial issue. Because more often than not, it's the husband that has been dealing with the finances. And I know that coming into this topic, it came from a very personal experience for you. Would you like to give us the background of why you do what you do?
So I've been a financial advisor for getting close to 30 years now. And over my career, I have found myself working with more and more women. Either I was working with a couple and the husband passed away, I've continued to work with a surviving spouse, or I was getting introduced to more women that were, as you said, on their own, either by choice or by situation as a result of divorce, widowhood, et cetera. And I found that I really, really enjoyed working with women. Most women seem to appreciate a more holistic view of life as opposed to just focusing solely on the money. They seem to appreciate thinking about and exploring what the money's for and how they can use it to really fuel a deliberate and purposeful life, which I really find super rewarding and I really enjoy talking about. So as I found myself working with what kind of became a natural market over the years and reflecting back on my own personal situation, which is, I think is what you were alluding to, Deborah, when I was coming out of college, or I guess what you in Canada would call it university. This was, 30 years ago almost now. My mom and dad went through a divorce, and my mom had been a stay-at-home mom. She took care of my two younger brothers and I. My two younger brothers were still living at home at the time. My dad had been very, very successful. And long story short, my mom got a lot of assets. She got the house. She got a lot of spousal support. She got a lot of child support for my two younger brothers who were still at home, as I mentioned. And fast forward to today, she is in her mid 70s and she's essentially broke. And I'll be the first to admit she made some poor decisions. I think she probably bears a lot of responsibility for where she's at today. But I can't help but think if she had had some good guidance and trusted advice along the way, how the outcome could have been much different and much more positive. I love my mom. I love my dad. We still have a strong family despite the divorce. But my brothers and I are going to be dealing with my mom, for the rest of her life, and we're happy to do so. But it's just a challenging situation, and it could have been different. And so, taking that personal experience, having seen that up close, and continuing to see it, coupled with the fact that I found myself working with and enjoying working with more and more women, about 8 years ago, I just embraced it. And so I kind of created this brand called Wealth Care for Women. And I don't work exclusively with women. Many of my clients are happily married couples, which I love. But it's important that both people are involved in the discussions and engaged in making decisions together, as opposed to one person delegating it to the other. Hopefully that gives you some good context and background.
It does. It does. And it explains the name of your business being Wealth Care for Women. The focus being on where you can offer your services that would make the biggest difference. And I think that from what I have learned from listening to my clients, there's a lot of secrecy around the finances. The older generations, they used to say it's the man's responsibility, right, to take care of all the finances. And what we've seen is that women outlast the man. And so there'll be then a lot of women that have been used to having their husbands take care of everything and find themselves in a situation where they don't have a clue. And that's kind of scary because finances are really important. And, what would you suggest? Like, I imagine that there are some steps that need to be undertaken when somebody finds themselves in a situation that they need to then step up and take care of their own finances. What kind of advice do you have?
So a couple of thoughts there. But let me preface it by saying that money, while a taboo subject and something that is just not socially acceptable to talk about with your friends and your family, and as you kind of alluded to, even with your partner or spouse, that doesn't mean that it's complex. That doesn't mean that it has to be difficult or challenging. In fact, I think the best approach to money is to keep things deliberately as simple as possible. And let me also say that there's a lot of research and studies that support the fact that all things being equal, women are actually better equipped to make money decisions than men. And I think part of that stems from some of the things I alluded to earlier about the fact that women are typically more patient, they're more holistic in their thinking and their approach to decision making, and that can actually lead to better financial decisions. So I think what you're talking about, Deborah, for many women is this fear of, I've got these money decisions that are being thrust upon me. Or maybe they're not being thrust upon me. I want to be more engaged in the family financial decisions. How do I go about doing that? Well, let me first say, I think this fear is bred of unfamiliarity. I often tell the women that I'm working with, like, hey, you've got this. Like, we can figure this out. You can figure this out. We'll get you to a point where all this makes sense. But if they've delegated it to their spouse or partner, whether that's been for a few years or for decades, and frankly, that's one of the benefits of being a relationship. It's kind of like division of labor, delegation of responsibilities. I mean, that's actually one of the benefits of being in a relationship, whether that's a marriage or another relationship. So I don't want to discount that. But I would also say that just because it's not something that you're familiar with, because maybe you handed that off to a spouse or partner years ago, does not mean it's something that should be intimidating or overwhelming. So to answer your question, and that's kind of a long-winded preamble, to answer your question, Deborah, I think the first step is to take an inventory of where you are today. So what do you have today? What do you own? Whether that's personal property, that could be an automobile, that could be jewelry, that could be a home, that could be bank accounts, investment accounts, perhaps savings, retirement accounts, whatever the case may be. You basically want to take an inventory of what do you own. You also want to take an inventory of what do you owe. So if you have a home, do you have a mortgage on the home? Do you have credit card balances? Do you have school loan balances? Any other debts outstanding on a car payment or things like that. So now we know, what do we own and what do we owe? Next, we want to figure out what do we earn? So what sources of income do we have coming in? That could be from a job. That could be from joint income. So maybe your spouse is the primary earner in your household. That's fine, but figure out like what's coming into the household in terms of earnings. And then perhaps most important, figure out what your spending is. The phrase I often like to use is, what does it cost to be you? And that's everything. That's paying taxes, paying bills, buying food, going out to eat, putting fuel in the car, taking care of children, spending time with your friends, going to the gym, whatever it is that encapsulates your life. We need to figure out what that costs. A relatively quick and easy way to figure that out is to go to your spending accounts. So that could be like a bank account where you write checks, or go to the ATM and or credit card accounts. And you can either do this online or get your statements from like the last 6 to 12 months and basically add up all your spending. And so if you do it for 6 months, add up all your spending from credit cards, checks, ATM withdrawals for 6 months, add all that up, divide by 6, and that'll give you an average of what you've been spending on a month-to-month basis. If you add it up for 12 months, which is better because that would capture maybe some one-time expenses, divide by 12, and that'll give you a good average of what you've been spending. Mm-hmm. Once you know these things, you've already figured out more than half the battle, because just knowing where you are, I think, is an important first step to being able to figure out, all right, well, it's hard to know where you want to go unless you know where you're starting from. And so I think that's an important first step.
That's perfect, because when we know that there are steps to follow, it takes the scariness away, the uncertainty, to use your word. I think it's a better word. And so if we know that we need to look at the facts, so we need to know what's coming in, what's going out. And I like the concept of not taking it as black and white, like, what bills need to be paid and only looking at that. But the idea of what it takes to live your life. What things do you enjoy doing? What hobbies do you have? What expenses are incurred doing this hobby? And I think that's a really important point. So no, continue. It's perfect.
Well, so once you have this set of information, these facts, knowing where you are right now, I personally believe it can be really empowering, because once you know what's coming in, what's going out, what do you own, what do you owe, you can then make some more deliberate decisions around that. Because while how much you earn is something maybe you can influence, because you can always negotiate for a pay raise, or you can always maybe try to find another job or career and earn more money. That's less in your control than your spending is. And let me be very clear, like, this is not an exercise in spending as little as possible and being frugal to the point where it becomes painful, just so you can have this like idyllic lifestyle 20 or 30 years down the road in retirement. It's about striking a healthy balance between living a wonderful life today, but still preparing for the future. So once you know what's coming in and what's going out, so we're kind of focusing on income and expenses, then you have the opportunity to be very deliberate about your spending. So maybe many of your listeners are familiar with Marie Kondo and her organizational structure of like, do these things bring you joy?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I would apply the same thing to your spending. So for example, if your morning routine is to go to Starbucks, and that's just something that really puts a smile on your face and that really helps kick off your day, I'm not going to be the person that says, you can't afford to go to Starbucks, because if you take the $4 or whatever it costs to go to Starbucks every day and add that up over your lifetime, that could result in hundreds of thousands of dollars of missed retirement savings. That's a backwards way to look at this, in my opinion. Instead, look at your spending. Maybe start with big expenditure items. So that could be mortgage, insurance, car payment, things like that, and work your way down from large to small. And ask yourself about, and be somewhat introspective, but ask yourself about that expenditure. If I'm paying $429 a month for that car payment, why am I doing that? And this is not there's not a sense of judgment here. You should not be judgmental. It's just having an honest dialogue with yourself about, do I need to continue to do that? And the answer may be yes. But it may also be, well, I could actually trade in that car for a much smaller payment, or maybe I could get a car that I could pay cash for and not have that payment any longer. Yeah. And to use that example, what would happen? Well, if that $429 a month payment goes to $229 a month, what do you do with that extra $200 a month? Well, do you spend it somewhere else that brings you joy and lights you up and puts a smile on your face? And the answer is maybe. But the answer might also be, well, maybe we should take that extra $200 and use that to start paying down that car loan even more quickly, or use it to pay down other debt like school loans or credit card, or build up savings, or start investing for the longer term. I could give numerous examples, but I think it really is a great opportunity for anyone listening to take an honest look of where the money's going and ask yourself, like, for example, I often hear about people that signed up for some kind of subscription payment, whether that's Netflix or a gym or whatever. They haven't watched Netflix or they haven't gone to the gym in months. Well, maybe that's a quick and easy way to free up some dollars that could either go to another area that you would enjoy spending the money and get some fulfillment and reward, or to be a little bit more strategic and think about how you can use those dollars longer term. So those are a couple of examples. But I would just maybe tie a bow on this by saying it's a real opportunity to be deliberate, be thoughtful, and to be very personal. And when I say that, I mean, don't fall into the trap of spending money, saving money, doing this or doing that because you think your parents or your friends or your family or your children expect that of you. It's your money. You have the opportunity to be very deliberate and be very personal. It should be a personal plan for you. It should not be based on what your best friend or a family member tells you they think you should do, or what they imply that they think you should do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it begs the question then about wealth. What is wealth? I mean, that's a loaded question, because I think everybody could answer it differently. But, the idea of putting all of your extra money into either paying off your mortgage or saving it and not actually living. What are you saving your money for? And so I wonder, how does that play a part in the decisions as far as what to do with our money?
That gets into an interesting concept around our lives in general, and then retirement more specifically. If we rewind, I would say even 50 or 60 years ago, generally speaking, we would grow up, go through school, get a job, work there for 40-ish years, retire, get a pension, maybe live another 10 to 15 years. And that was kind of our life. Average life expectancy back in those days was, mid to late 70s. Today, if someone goes through school, gets a job, they may stay with one company or hop around companies and work for 30 or 40 years and retire, let's say when they're in their mid 60s, they may live another 30 plus years. And so when we think about wealth and what's it for, it's really to think about what I like to refer to as work optional. I think retirement is a really loaded word, and it has a lot of connotations with it. Some are positive, many are negative. And I would actually argue that retirement is actually unhealthy for many people, because they lose a lot of their social interactions, their routines, their purpose, their mental acuity, things like that. I'm not saying you should work until the day you die, but I think you should have some activity that occupies your mind and gives you kind of a day-to-day purpose and reason to get out of bed. That's another subject, which I know you've covered with some of your other guests. So this idea of wealth is, if I want to have the option to either retire or dial back my work at some point in the future, and that paycheck goes away, and fewer companies are paying pensions or basically giving you an ongoing stream of income, how do you replace that paycheck? And so at a high or at a broad level, that's what I think of monetary wealth. And by the way, money is only one component of wealth from my perspective. But when I think about monetary wealth, it's to build up savings and investments that can help replace or supplement future income streams if you are no longer interested in or no longer have the ability to work full time.
What I'm hearing is it's about having freedom.
Absolutely. And that may be a little cliched, but that comes up a lot in my conversations with people. Ideas around freedom, independence, choice. People often say, I want to be able to do what I want when I want to do it. But the interesting question that I would then ask is, well, what do you want to do? And a lot of people say, well, I want freedom. And I'm like, well, what is freedom to you? And this gets back to what I was talking about earlier about being deliberate about our spending. Like, what does freedom mean to you? Is that the ability to go sit in the park and read a book for a couple of hours on a weekday afternoon? Is it being able to travel? Is it being able to go out to nice dinners? Is it meaning having your family and friends over and cooking for them? I mean, again, it can and should be personal to you. And while I love the idea of freedom, I would push back a little bit on freedom and encourage people to think more specifically about whether it's freedom or independence or choice. What do those words mean to you personally? What ideas, what smells, what colors, what images did those words bring to mind for you? And write them down. And then you can start to incorporate some of those ideas into your spending decisions, your saving decisions, things like that.
Yeah, that's that holistic way of looking at life, not looking at things in the black and white, but, making it personal and giving yourself permission to create a life that would bring you joy. As you said, I love that, the Marie Kondo analogy there, because it's exactly that. If you're saving your money because you think you should, because your parents did, or you've been advised to, what is the purpose of that? And is that bringing you joy, or is it bringing you pain because all of your money is going into some unknown place that you can't enjoy? But it is important to feel stable and secure. And that is one of on Maslow's hierarchy of needs is basic needs. And if what is happening in your life as far as your wealth is concerned, or your money more specifically is concerned, if it's not giving you a feeling of safety and security, then there's something needs to change from my perspective. So I have a question then. Being in the line of work that you're in and you talk to a lot of people, what kinds of pitfalls or challenges show up the most when you start working with somebody that needs to take over and take care of their finances?
I would say the first and foremost, it's the emotional challenges. I mean, we're all human, we're all emotional beings. And so whether you're coming out of divorce or the loss of a spouse, what a world-changing time in your life that is. And so I think everybody needs to appreciate the fact that while there are maybe some money and financial decisions that need to be made, those should be made in due course after you've had the opportunity to grieve the loss of a relationship or grieve the loss of a spouse or a partner. And many things, it depends on the situation, but many things can wait. So oftentimes I find that many people, women specifically, feel like I need to deal with this now. And personally, I think a lot of that stems from it being like, I'd rather deal with that than deal with the emotions. So I want to keep myself busy. I want to, come up with this checklist of 100 items that I need to work on. And that's going to allow me to keep myself busy and not have to deal with the grief and the emotions or whatever else I'm dealing with over here. People cope with emotions different ways. I'm not a psychotherapist or a psychologist. That's for them to deal with. But I do want to be cognizant of the fact that the emotions do need to be dealt with and be acknowledged in their own right. Back to your question, as far as the biggest challenge, though, I'd say it's two or threefold. It's one, not knowing who to listen to or who to trust. So if you're going through divorce, if you lost a spouse, you whether it's in a church or a religious community, whether it's in your social circle among friends, or maybe it's your family, it could be a close friend or relative. They're going to offer their well-meaning advice. They're going to say, well, I think you should do this, or here's what I did. And while they might mean well, their advice could be the worst possible thing for you because they might not know the entirety of your situation, or they might be talking from an experience that was radically different from what you're going through. I mentioned that just to say, be cautious. Don't be rude. You don't have to, ignore people. Just be very skeptical, I think I would say, of other people's well-meaning advice, suggestions, and recommendations, whether that's with regard to money or frankly, anything else for that matter. Another challenge is, which I kind of alluded to earlier, is in addition to like outright advice and suggestions, we're all subject to this idea of mimetic desire, which is we tend to want things because we see other people doing them. And social media and the internet has just fanned the flames of this. So this is a growing problem. But I would encourage people to be very selfish, frankly, for lack of a better word, and be very willing to be very dive deep, introspective, and be very personal and make decisions that are right for you, regardless of whether or not they might seem conventional or right for the people or the communities that are around you. And the final challenge I would say that I see most often is kind of the opposite of those women that just want to kind of keep themselves busy and occupied and come up with this list of things to do, financial or otherwise. The opposite of that is true also, is that they're paralyzed because they're overwhelmed. They don't know who to listen to, or they're getting so much suggestions and advice and input that they almost kind of just go into paralysis and they want to stick their head in the sand and they do nothing, which clearly is not the right solution either. There are some ways to deal with these and to move forward. But I would say as far as challenges go, those are two or three that come to mind as being most prevalent or things I encounter most often.
Yeah. And so on that note, if somebody wants to look for some advice from somebody that's going to steer them in the right direction, they would come to somebody like yourself. That what I noticed being a fee-only financial advisor. Well, what types of financial advisors are there out there?
So I would, that's actually a good question and actually a pretty big question. And I'll kind of address that based on my own experience. So when I started my career at Merrill Lynch, which is, I'm sure most people are familiar with, it's a large global financial institution. And when I worked at Merrill Lynch, I was initially a commission advisor, meaning the only way I got paid is if your money moved from one place to another. So if we bought a stock, sold a stock, if we bought a mutual fund, sold a mutual fund, something like that, I was typically paid a commission, not by my clients, but by Merrill Lynch or by a third party to move your money around. So commissions are one way that your advisor gets compensated. The second way is fee-based. So fee-based means, and I also did this later in my career at Merrill Lynch, as the industry started migrating from less commissions to charging a fee based on the value of your portfolio. And so I would, for instance, have a client that had, let's say, $500,000 in a portfolio. Merrill Lynch would charge them 1% a year. So $5,000 a year. I would get paid part of that. Merrill Lynch would get paid part of that. But here's the catch. I could still, I didn't do this very often, but I still had the ability to sell and charge commissions. So I would, in simple terms, I would think it was commission, fee and commission, fee only, which is what I adopted when I left Merrill Lynch back in 2006, is no more commissions. The only compensation that I receive are the fees paid directly to me from my clients. Now, I'll be the first to say, anytime money changes hands between two people, there are going to be some degree of conflict of interest. But I believe that fee only is the least conflicted manner of delivering financial advice. And so I'm answering your question, Deborah, talking primarily about compensation, because I think those are kind of the biggest ways to delineate one advisor from the next. But there are also, advisors that focus on financial planning, those that focus on investments. There are those that are focused on insurance and other kind of varieties or subsets of financial advice. Understanding how your advisor is compensated is important. And I'll also say, I'm not vilifying advisors that work for a commission. That's perfectly fine. I just think it's important for their clients to understand how they're paid and why they're making the recommendations that they're making. And they should understand if their advisor's interests are aligned or not aligned with theirs as a client. So hopefully that maybe gives you a little bit better context about the landscape of financial advice.
Sure. And so with that being said, how do I know what type of advisor I need
So that's a good question. And what I would tell people, and I'll be the first to admit I'm biased because this is based largely in my beliefs, that I think that every person, regardless of your situation, regardless of your wealth, should start with a financial plan. And I mention that because some advisors are very financial planning focused. Other advisors talk a lot about financial planning, but they really use financial planning really as a glorified proposal tool to sell you insurance or other products. So as much as I would love, Deborah, to say, like, here's a simple, clean, black and white answer, unfortunately, it's not that simple. For anyone that is interested in hiring a financial advisor, I would recommend that you ask around among your friends, your trusted friends, and say, hey, do you have an advisor that you recommend? And if you would recommend them, why? Why do you like them? I would meet with a minimum of 3. I would prefer 5 or more. So this is going to take a little bit of investment in your time, but I would start there. I can, if you'd like, I can probably, Deborah, find a list of sample questions that you would maybe like to ask. I can maybe send that to you if you'd like to share it with your listeners.
Absolutely.
But I would ask some pointed questions, things like, how do you get paid? How many clients do you have? How often will we meet? How much access will I have to you? Do you believe in financial planning? Why or why not? A lot of people like to talk about investments and focus on investments. I would argue that investments are just a small but important part of an overall financial plan. So I guess I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I guess what I would encourage people to do is invest some time and energy, talk to a minimum of 3, preferably 5 or more advisors. And I would encourage you to gravitate towards those that have a clear and demonstrated focus on financial planning and making financial planning based recommendations, because your financial plan it should be tied to your life and to what you're trying to do with your money, if it's done right, in my opinion, as opposed to someone that's just focused on selling you as much insurance as they can or trying to invest your money and make your money grow. There's nothing wrong with that, but again, what's the money for? Why are we trying to grow the money? So I think using a financial plan as kind of a litmus test to find the right advisor for you is probably a really good starting point. There are some organizations out there as well, like XY, the XY Planning Network, Garrett Planning Network, the Alliance of Comprehensive Advisors are a few that come to mind that are predominantly fee-only advisors that are predominantly planning-based. Those would be great places for your listeners to start.
Beautiful. So what would people benefit from if they came to you regarding what you've just mentioned? What do they get when they come to you?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. And I'll be the first to say, like, I love what I do. I love helping people, but I also recognize that I'm not the right fit for everyone. So as much as I believe in what I do, and I believe it's the right way to do it, I believe you really need to be very particular about who you entrust your finances and your financial decision-making with. And I'm not going to be the right advisor for even a fraction of all your listeners out there. And I recognize that, and your listeners should recognize that as well. But when someone comes to me, we first start with a very balanced approach to my having an opportunity to get to know my clients. And when I say balanced, it's not just quantitative data. It's not just, all right, well, tell me your date of birth and tell me about how much money you have and how much you owe. Some of the things we talked about earlier. I first spent a lot of time on qualitative data. So like one of the first questions I'll ask in my discovery meetings with a new potential client is, why is money important to you? And this goes back to something you said earlier, Deborah, around freedom. That word comes up a lot. So they might say, for example, I would say, Deborah, why, we'll kind of role play this. Deborah, why is money important to you?
Because it's what I need to feel safe and secure in my life.
So why is feeling safe and secure in your life important to you?
So that I can enjoy it.
And why is enjoying it important to you? Or put another way, what is enjoying your life? What does that mean to you?
It means freedom. There's that word again. But if I were to kind of sift that through and put some perspective to it, feeling that I am alive and doing things that bring me joy.
And so I would continue to ask questions and ask you to define, what does it mean to feel alive? What does it mean for you to feel joy? And we could obviously dig into this pretty deeply, but I think that's an interesting place to start, because that conversation begins to reveal your values. And so rather than focusing just on the quantitative dollars and cents, I want to understand who you are as a person, what's important to you, why it's important to you. And then I want to also begin to get a sense of your priorities. Well, if like freedom and feeling alive and having a sense of joy is important to you, and then we could begin to quantify, well, what does that look like in dollar terms and in activities and spending? And then we can prioritize among those, which of those is more important. And that begins to give us a framework with which we can build out a financial plan for you. And I can also bring some other tools and exercises to the table through some training that I've gone through that gets into what I refer to as financial life planning. So it kind of brings an element of life coaching, although it's very practical and grounded in financial planning. So it's designed to really give me the opportunity to get to know you, because only after I know you well can I deliver truly personalized advice or suggestions. And what I find is so many advisors, although well-meaning, they're more focused on your portfolio and making the money grow, which is important. But I think only making those decisions in the context of your broader life is the best way to go about it. And so that's a glimpse into the way that I approach and engage with my clients. And I also want to know, tell me about your relationships. Tell me about your family, your parents. Are they alive? Are they in good health? Because your family's health history is going to play into your life expectancy. And what assumption do we assume you're going to live to 85 or 95 or 105? Because that plays into your financial plan decision making too. And that's not something we know, but it's something we should discuss, and you should be able to contribute to that decision as well. But do you have pets? Do you have organizations that are important to you? And so we have this really interesting dialogue that usually runs an hour and a half to 2 hours. And as I'm asking these questions, I'm capturing them in a mind map visually, and I'm trying to use your words. And so it builds what I call this wealth map, where money is an important part of it, but we're also talking about your values and your goals and your relationships, your other interests outside of work, your other advisors that you work with. And so it begins to bring this sense of organization and structure to what can otherwise feel kind of overwhelming and disjointed and disorganized. And I find that with women, and going back to what we first talked about, if a woman's going through divorce or she's lost her spouse or partner, starting here and giving some organization and structure to all this can really, I've found, bring a lot of peace of mind and be a good first step to start making positive progress towards figuring this out and making some decisions with an eye on the future.
That is so well said. And, I must say, Russ, talking to you today has really opened my eyes to, I had no idea that the financial side of things could feel so good, as far as from a holistic perspective, which is the place that I live in my work, in my life. And the financial side of it, I've seen as a separate entity in some degree. And what you've shared with us today has allowed me to see that it can all be integrated. It should all be integrated, because it's only a part of who we really are. And you're right, everything needs to be considered. And to have somebody, when you were talking, it reminded me of the difference between a medical doctor and a naturopathic doctor. And a naturopathic doctor asks tons of questions to get to know their patient from all these different perspectives. So you're the naturopathic doctor of the finance world, Russ, I think.
Well, I'll take it. I don't think I've ever been called that, but I'll take it, and I appreciate it, Deborah.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. You've given me some direction to look at for my own life, and I hope for the listener that there's some spark of recognition in some of the things that you've been saying, and if there's something that we need to do and to make some changes so that we can have some joy, more joy in our life, then I think that's wonderful. So Russ Thornton has a podcast himself called Women's Retirement Radio. And so if we go to wealthcareforwomen.com, you'll find all about Russ and you'll find about his podcast there. Is there a lasting comment that you would like to share with our listeners?
I'll throw this in, Deborah, real quick. And it's something that I've said elsewhere before, but I find that so many people and women, when they think about their finances, it's almost like they have this pile of jigsaw puzzle pieces that are just scattered on the table, and they don't know what to do with them. And so I think for anyone out there that's ever done a jigsaw puzzle, you typically start with the edges because those are kind of easy to pick out. You kind of build a frame. So once you got the frame of the puzzle, what do you do next? You look at the picture on the box. What I find so often missing is from people's financial decision-making is the picture on the box. They've got all these pieces. They've started to maybe put a frame around it, but they don't really know how to build out the rest of their financial decision-making process because they haven't taken a step back. They haven't taken the time to really think about what is the picture on the box that I want to create for my life. And so using that example, that brief kind of exercise we went through, Deborah, of like, why is money important to you, and diving into some of those areas of life and being more holistic, as you said, maybe taking more of a naturopathic approach allows us to get a very clear picture on the box. And once we have that clear picture on the box, that makes our financial decisions much more clear and much more easy, much less overwhelming, much less anxious. And I think everybody could benefit from that. So I think that might be a good parting thought.
Perfect. Thanks, Russ, for joining us. This has been very, very eye-opening. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. This was fun.
Thanks for listening. And did you know that positive reviews from listeners like you help me get these messages out into the world? Leave a rating for Own the Grey on your podcast app or at ownthegray.ca. This episode of Own the Grey is brought to you by I Am. Discover your unique talents, realize your potential, and align to your path. Take the first step to uncover your life purpose by visiting debrajones.ca/courses.